Tamasha ya kwanza ya vyombo vya habari barani Afrika imeng'oa nanga rasmi hii leo jijini Nairobi nchini Kenya, huku washikadau wakisisitiza mbinu za kuboresha sekta hiyo. Kulingana na waliozungumza katika tamasha hii ya siku mbili ambayo iliwaleta washikadau kutoka kote bara Afrika, mabadiliko katika vyombo vya habari yameletwa na teknolojia.
What we're seeing and what we talk about as a revolution, a digital revolution or evolution for me, did not start today. It started more than 10 years ago, but a lot of people were not aware of it. So what happened is there was a whole thinking, especially in Africa, but even there was a thinking from Europe toward Africa where they said, you know, when you talk about digital, they were like, people cannot afford it. People will not be there. Forget about digital. Don't talk about digital. And that was the biggest mistake, that we were not prepared for it. I think Africa's biggest problem has been that we accepted the stereotype that the West placed us in about 15 years ago, that you guys cannot afford the internet. And we believed it. And those of us in the media acted as if we're going to continue being the way we are. And the explosion happened when the mobile internet became affordable. That's when everything changed.
The first trend that interests me is what I call the rise of the raging machines. Because what has happened is, if you look at the newsrooms today, because of a combination of several forces: one, social media; secondly, there have been some very positive developments. There are all kinds of new funding models which have given media a bit of creative freedom. But what has happened is that this is happening at a time when you have a very, very deep influence, basically, of film culture, film and social media culture in the newsroom.
You know, I actually think that the African continent is leading the way in terms of innovation in media, because we have to. The old way of doing things, it's no longer financially viable, or the government pressure is too much. And most importantly, our audiences have moved to new places to get information, which is why you are seeing all kinds of interesting innovations around getting news onto social media platforms, different ways of doing journalism. My newspaper, The Continent, we are published on WhatsApp, and because of that publishing model, we were able to develop a readership of 100,000 people in 130 different countries around the world in the space of under 3 years. Those kinds of innovations come out of necessity, and that is the place where we find ourselves at the moment, and that's why we need to start learning from each other about how we solve these problems.
Tangu kuibuka kwa janga la COVID-19, umetajwa kama baadhi ya mambo yaliyochangia wanahabari kubuni mbinu tofauti kuwafikia wasikilizaji, watazamaji na hata wasomaji.
You will soon see, instead of buying television and a car, a working family's first and a young man's first objective will be to get a mobile phone. This is 2012. And today, I can bet you that there is no young person who is happy not to have a mobile phone that's connected to the internet. So I think the first conversation or the perspective is from the consumers. Is the newsroom talking to the consumers the way they want? Are people still waiting for the 8 o'clock news? And if the people are not waiting for the 8 o'clock news, what are the newsrooms doing for that? So I think that's one very important perspective.
Because I think where we are, if you ask me, is an inflection point in many regards. If you think about what's going on in a newsroom in Kenya or in Ghana or in South Africa, whichever part of the continent you think about, I don't think it is necessarily true that they have unique problems from what's happening around the world. I think the expressions might be different. We might have to redefine what is African journalism, what is African newsroom, but that is a much wider conversation.
Tamasha hii ambayo imeandaliwa na Baraza Media Lab imeweka jukwaa kwa washikadau kutoa mawazo kuhusu jinsi tasnia ya wanahabari itapiga hatua barani Afrika.
I mean, it's a long post-COVID session where people are not meeting each other. And there's something unique and powerful that happens when people meet each other. They tend to come up with crazy ideas. They tend to console each other through the pains that I've gone through. So for us, even that alone is enough for us as an ecosystem to appreciate.
And I'm sure that there's quite a number of countries that would relate. It becomes very difficult for the newsroom to really set the agenda. The only thing that is safe is to go and cover what the minister is saying at a launch of an event, or the president inaugurating something. I think that when you ask about what can be done, I always insist that it, just like the politicians say, is something that also we journalists have to say. What do the people want? And it sounds very almost democratic, but if we look at the business models that work, however much as journalists we may try to hold our noses, they're the so-called bloggers who actually make money out of it. So in Tanzania, Mange Kimambi makes money. She's just basically looking at what she calls breaking news, but it's around relationships, human interest, and so on and so forth.
Vizuizi vya serikali kwa vyombo vya habari vimetajwa kwa baadhi ya changamoto ambazo zimeathiri kunawiri kwa sekta hii barani Afrika.
Today Nigeria has got over 100 TV stations. Zimbabwe has got only one TV station. Kenya used to have one TV station controlled by the Kenyan Broadcasting Corporation, owned by the state. But today there are many TV stations in Kenya. There are many radio stations in Kenya. All the radio stations in Zimbabwe are owned by the state, indirectly or directly. So I think certain parts of the continent have done well. And I think there's need for those parts that have done well to sort of accentuate, to amplify the voices of journalism that exist in parts like Zimbabwe where they haven't done well, where there's restriction. In Zimbabwe today, you need to be accredited by the state to practice as a journalist. The state can deny you that accreditation is given it their own choice. And so it's a mixed bag depending with the kind of countries that you're looking at on the African continent.
Thank you.
Tamasha hii inatarajiwa kukamilika hapo kesho.